What if the life you thought was perfect crumbled in an instant? One text, one betrayal, and 12 years of trust shattered, leaving a family at a crossroads. This is a story of heartbreak and resilience, where a husband discovers the unthinkable, a wife wrestles with regret, and together they must navigate the painful path of rebuilding trust for themselves and their children. It's a raw and gripping tale that reminds us how even in the depths of betrayal, there's a glimmer of hope. It started as an ordinary evening. Me, scrolling through my phone on the couch, sipping my lukewarm coffee. Then a notification lit up her screen across the room. A name I didn't recognize. A snippet of a message that I shouldn't have seen but couldn't unsee. My stomach knotted as curiosity morphed into dread. With trembling hands, I unlocked the phone, half hoping I was wrong, half fearing I was right. What I found was worse than my nightmares. Messages dripping with intimacy, with a familiarity that wasn't mine. Betrayal seeped into my bones, an icy wave washing away every ounce of trust. Confronting her wasn't planned. It erupted. "Who is he?" I demanded, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Her face turned pale, her eyes wide as if caught in a storm she didn't expect. She stammered, then fell silent, as if silence could shield her. But I wouldn't let it. When the words finally came, they shattered the air. She admitted it. Everything. Her betrayal was real, and so were her attempts to keep it buried. My world spun, but her calmness, her measured tone, felt like the cruelest cut. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to erase what I'd just heard, but instead, I just stood there, silent, unmoving. She explained, her words carefully chosen as though rehearsed. Yet every sentence felt like another blow. She said it wasn't planned, that it just happened. I hated those words. My mind flashed to the moments we'd shared, holidays, birthdays, the promises we made, and wondered if any of it had been real for her. How long had this been going on? How had I not seen it? There was no conclusion to that night, just exhaustion and questions that swirled endlessly. I slept on the couch, or at least I tried. Her confession kept echoing in my head, pulling me back into the chaos. Was this the end? Could there even be a way forward? And as the first rays of dawn crept in, a single thought lingered. What about the family we'd built? The years we'd invested? I didn't have answers, but I knew I had to face them, one by one. 12 years. That's how long we'd built this life together. Our routines, our laughter, and the two little lives that looked up to us. To everyone else, we were the perfect couple. Friends envied our stability. Neighbors admired our harmony. I played the devoted husband, attending soccer games, baking cookies for school events, and stealing moments to remind her how much she meant to me. At least I thought I did. Beneath the surface, there were cracks I hadn't seen. Maybe I was too wrapped up in keeping the ship afloat to notice when she started drifting away. Our home was warm, filled with the echoes of children's giggles and the chaos of everyday life. Dinner table conversations about homework and weekend plans painted a picture of happiness. But now I see the spaces in between, the unspoken words, her distant gaze, my preoccupation with providing instead of connecting. Were those the signs I missed? Our kids, unaware of the storm brewing, brought me grounding joy. I couldn't let this betrayal rip apart the world they knew. But how could I keep the facade when my heart was in pieces? I thought back to the early years, our honeymoon phase when laughter came easily and arguments felt trivial. Somewhere along the line, that changed. Maybe it was the late nights, the deadlines, the endless cycle of parenthood that left little time for us. Or maybe it was more than that. She said she felt something was missing, but why hadn't she told me? Was I so blind to her needs? Or had she decided I wasn't the answer long before she admitted it to herself? As I watched her sleep that night, face serene as if the weight of her confession had lifted, I couldn't help but wonder, what did our marriage mean to her? Did she think of it as a safe haven? Or had it become a cage she wanted to escape? And where did that leave me? More importantly, where did that leave us? My thoughts spun, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about what had led us here, to this breaking point. She told me about him, a colleague at work, someone I'd never met, yet now I couldn't stop picturing. It wasn't the grand gestures or dramatic declarations that lured her in, she said. It was the little things. Compliments I'd forgotten to give, attention I'd assumed was enough. Moments I thought were ours but weren't. He noticed her in ways I hadn't, she explained, her voice trembling. She wasn't justifying it, or at least, that's what she claimed. But every word felt like an accusation of my neglect, my inadequacy. Was it my fault then? I didn't know whether to scream or crumble. It started innocently, she insisted. Shared jokes in the break room, the occasional text about work that turned into something else. She described it like a slippery slope, as if she'd just stumbled down and couldn't stop. Months of building, something behind my back while I went about our life thinking we were fine. She swore she didn't plan it, that it wasn't about him but about what he represented. A version of herself she'd lost somewhere between marriage and motherhood. Hearing that hurt more than anything. Was she trying to find herself or lose me? She spoke about regret, about how it consumed her even as the betrayal unfolded. She said she wanted to stop. That every message, every glance was a battle between guilt and desire. And yet she didn't. That choice, deliberate or not, echoed louder than any apology. Her eyes filled with tears as she confessed that she never thought I'd find out. That she believed she could bury this secret and carry on as if nothing had happened. But now, here we were. Her confession laid bare, and me trying to understand a version of her I'd never known. I listened, silent but burning inside. What could I even say? That I understood? That I forgave her? I wasn't there yet. She told me she'd already ended it before I found out, that she realized too late how much she'd risked. The words felt hollow, like an attempt to soften the blow. If it was over, why did it feel like the damage was still unfolding? And as she sat there, waiting for me to respond, I wondered if she was hoping for redemption, or just for me not to leave. I thought betrayal would feel like a single sharp stab, but it wasn't. It was a slow, excruciating ache, spreading through every corner of my life. The memories that once brought me joy now felt tainted. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, talking, sharing what should have been ours. I tried to bury the images, but they kept clawing their way back. And then came the questions. Had I not been enough? Was I too focused on the wrong things? It was as if everything I believed about myself and us had been torn apart. When I finally spoke, it wasn't a shout or a scream. It was a whisper, raw and broken. I told her about the sacrifices I'd made, the dreams I'd set aside to build this life with her. I wanted her to understand what she'd taken from me, what she'd broken. Her tears came then, silent but steady, as she tried to explain how sorry she was. But every apology felt like an echo, fading before it could reach me. I wanted to believe her regret, to see the woman I'd trusted, but all I saw was someone I didn't recognize anymore. The guilt in her eyes was undeniable, and part of me wanted to find comfort in it, to believe that she felt as much pain as I did. She spoke of her remorse, how she wished she could undo everything, how she hated herself for what she'd done. But even her desperation couldn't drown out the weight of what I was feeling. I was angry, yes, but more than that, I was hurt. Hurt in a way I hadn't thought possible. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that the person I loved could hurt me this deeply. That night, the house felt unbearably quiet, like the silence itself was mocking us. I wanted to walk away, to escape the heaviness of it all, but something held me back. Maybe it was the kids, asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of how fragile their world had become. Or maybe it was the tiniest spark of hope that we could fix this, that it wasn't the end. But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the thought, even if we tried, could we ever truly recover from this? A week passed before we sat down together again, this time in a place that once felt like ours. The restaurant where we celebrated anniversaries and toasted to dreams now felt foreign, almost mocking. She chose it, hoping it might spark something familiar. As I sat across from her, memories of laughter and love tangled with the bitterness of what we'd become. The weight of unspoken words hung in the air. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I couldn't let go either. Not yet. There was something in her eyes, fear, maybe hope, that kept me from walking out. We didn't dive into the hard stuff immediately. Instead, we talked around it, about the kids, their latest milestones, the mundane details of daily life. It was like testing the waters before plunging into the depths, but the casual talk couldn't hold for long. Eventually, the questions came. "Why him?" I asked, not looking at her. She hesitated, her voice cracking as she tried to explain. It wasn't about him. It was about me. Her words didn't answer much, but they revealed her struggle, her internal conflict. It wasn't satisfying, but it was something. As the conversation deepened, so did my unease. Every explanation she gave felt like a new wound, but I kept pushing. I needed to know, needed to understand how the woman I built a life with could make such a choice. She didn't shy away from the hard truths, even when they stung. I felt invisible, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't an excuse, she said, just the reality she'd been too scared to share. Her honesty was painful, but it was also disarming. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor, the vulnerability she'd tried to hide. By the time we left, nothing was resolved, but something had shifted. The anger wasn't gone, but it had softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Could we untangle this mess? Could we rebuild what we'd lost? As we walked to the car, I noticed her hesitating, waiting for me to make the first move. I didn't reach for her hand, but I didn't pull away when she stepped closer. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it felt like the first step toward something neither of us could name yet. We decided to try, though how felt like an impossible question. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild itself overnight. We sat down with notebooks laying out rules that felt more like lifelines. Weekly check-ins, honest ones. Therapy, both together and apart. She offered access to her phone and passwords without hesitation, but it didn't bring the comfort I thought it would. Instead, it reminded me of the surveillance we'd traded for what used to be simple trust. Still, I agreed. If we were going to move forward, this was the only way I knew how. For the kids, we maintained an illusion of normalcy. Morning routines, bedtime stories, and family dinners continued uninterrupted. They deserved to feel safe, even as my world felt like it was on the brink of collapse. At night, when the house was quiet, we'd talk, sometimes in whispers, sometimes through tears. She'd ask what I needed from her, and I'd tell her. Time, patience, proof. Words weren't enough anymore. I needed to see it in her actions, in the way she approached me, the way she showed up for us every day. She began making small changes, ones I didn't always acknowledge out loud, but noticed all the same. She cooked meals I loved without asking, left notes in my car like she used to, and made an effort to reconnect with the parts of me she'd overlooked. They weren't grand gestures, but they felt deliberate, like she was trying to show me that I mattered again. Even so, I couldn't stop questioning her motives. Was this genuine remorse or just an attempt to smooth over her guilt? I wanted to believe it was real, but doubt lingered like a shadow. Therapy sessions were raw, unfiltered. We talked about the gaps in our marriage, the moments we'd both let slip away. My pain, her regret, they sat between us, heavy and unavoidable. I wasn't ready to say we'd make it, but I was beginning to see glimmers of the partnership we'd once had. Those glimmers weren't enough yet, but they were something. And as we left one session, her hand brushed mine, tentative, waiting for a response. This time, I didn't pull away. It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was the beginning of hope. Intimacy wasn't something we could rush back into, not after everything. At first, even small touches felt heavy, weighted with the memory of what had happened. A simple hug lingered too long. Her fingers brushing mine sent a ripple of tension through me. But there was something in those moments. A longing. A reminder of what we'd lost and maybe still wanted to find. Slowly, we began to explore the spaces between us again, cautious but curious. Each step felt like walking on a tightrope, trying not to look down. Conversations that had once been routine now felt like invitations to rediscover each other. She asked about my day with a focus that hadn't been there before, and I found myself sharing more than I had in years. Laughter started to creep back, unexpected and almost foreign, but welcome. These weren't just small victories. They were moments that hinted at the life we'd built and the possibility of rebuilding it. Still, there was hesitation, an unspoken awareness of how fragile this newfound connection was. Even with him gone, his shadow lingered. It would take more than his absence to erase the damage done, but knowing he was no longer a part of her daily life, no longer sharing stolen glances or lingering conversations, gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. It was a small victory, but in a battle this big, I'd take what I could get. Still, I knew there was more work to do, more walls to tear down, more trust to rebuild. And with one piece of the puzzle finally out of the way, maybe we had a real shot. Rebuilding wasn't a straight path. It was a labyrinth with dead ends and moments of clarity tangled together. Some days it felt like we were making progress, finding our rhythm again. Other days the past crept in, casting long shadows over even the simplest moments. But we kept showing up, trying. She poured herself into proving her commitment. Small gestures, kind words, moments of vulnerability that chipped away at the walls between us. And me. I tried to meet her halfway, to let the anger fade and make room for something softer. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Our lives began to look more familiar, though the undertones were different. We'd walk the kids to school together, exchanging glances that carried a mix of unspoken apologies and tentative hope. At dinner, we laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. It wasn't forced. It felt real. These moments didn't erase the hurt, but they reminded me why I stayed. They reminded me of what we were trying to protect. Slowly, the foundation we thought was gone started to feel solid again, even if only in small pieces. There were times when it felt impossible, when the weight of what had happened threatened to crush us both. But even in those moments, there was something else, a quiet determination to keep going. Therapy helped, offering tools to navigate the landmines of our past. So did honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. She stopped hiding, and I stopped avoiding. For every step forward, there was the chance of a stumble back, but we learned to hold on tighter instead of pulling away. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One evening, as we sat together in the quiet of our living room, she reached for my hand. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. I didn't respond right away because the words caught in my throat. "Thank you for trying," I wanted to say. "Thank you for fighting for us." Instead, I squeezed her hand and let the silence speak for me. Our journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for. The faint glimmer of a future we could build together.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.